My name is Renee Whitman. I am 32 years old, and my father has been forgetting my birthday for as long as I can remember. Every year he throws bigger and bigger parties for my sister, packed with decorations, speeches, and guests, and every year my own birthday is treated like a typo in the family calendar. This year he forgot again, but I did not pretend it was fine. I took the savings he never asked about, signed papers he never saw, and bought a small house by a quiet lake far away from his control. When the keys were in my hand, I did one simple thing. I took a picture on the deck, nothing fancy, just proof that it was real, and posted it online with one short caption: birthday gift, self-gift. I did not send it to him. I did not tag my sister. I just put it out there and went back to unpacking boxes. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing on the table like something alive. Missed calls, messages, family group chat exploding. My father, who never had time to call me on my birthday, suddenly had a lot to say about my life. Before I tell you what he tried to do next and how far I had to go to protect that house and myself, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now, because I want to see just how far this story about family, loyalty, and payback can travel. The calls did not stop. My phone skittered across the table with every vibration. I let it ring until the screen dimmed, then lit up again under a new wave of incoming outrage. For once, I had done something big without warning anyone, and the reaction was instant and loud. I opened the family group chat first. Messages had stacked up in the time it took me to walk from the deck back into the kitchen. Screenshots of my post sat in the thread, circled and commented on as if they were evidence in some kind of case. No one asked where I was or if I was safe. They asked why I had done it, how I had afforded it, what people would think. My father's name appeared again and again between the other messages. He wrote about how irresponsible it looked, how ungrateful it made him appear after everything he had done for us. He mentioned the invitations already printed for my sister's next party, the guests he had to face, the image of a united family he had been polishing for years. My house by the lake was, in his words, a crack in that picture. My sister added her own version of concern. She asked if I was going through something, suggested I might be acting out, reminded me that big financial decisions should be discussed with the family. There was nothing gentle in the wording. It sounded less like worry and more like annoyance that I had stepped off script the week her event was supposed to dominate every conversation. I scrolled through the thread slowly, feeling something inside me separate. For years, I had read messages like these and translated them into duty. I had rushed to explain, to soften, to clean up anything that made life uncomfortable for them. Standing in my own kitchen, in a house that existed because I had quietly believed in myself, I read their words differently. Their panic was not about me. It was about control. When my father finally called directly, I let it ring twice before answering. He did not say happy birthday. He did not ask about the house. He went straight to demanding an explanation for why I would make a purchase like that without consulting him, why I would post it, why I would choose that exact moment, right before my sister's celebration. I did not list my savings, or the years of overtime, or the careful planning. I told him only that the house was mine, that the money was mine, and that the decision had already been made. The silence that followed said more than anything he could have thrown at me. He was not used to decisions that arrived fully formed without his approval on them. He tried a different angle next. He reminded me of family expectations, of how much effort he had invested in my sister's milestones, of how important it was that we all present a solid front. He said people would talk. He said I was making things harder than they needed to be. For a moment, I almost stepped back into the familiar pattern. The urge to smooth it over rose automatically, like muscle memory. I could hear the version of myself that would have apologized for the timing, promised to visit soon, offered to downplay the house so it would not overshadow the next party. I did not follow that script. Instead, I listened until he ran out of prepared lines. Then I told him I understood how he felt and that I would not be changing anything. My voice stayed even, not because I was calm, but because I finally knew exactly where I stood. I ended the call before he could redirect the conversation, set the phone down, and noticed my hands were not shaking. Their outrage had arrived as expected. What they did not expect was that this time, I was not going to help them contain it. When the noise on my phone finally settled into the background, the memories stepped forward instead. Standing in that kitchen, I could feel years lining up behind me like a row of closed doors. Every one of them led back to the same pattern. My father celebrating my sister like she was the family's headline act, and treating me like a footnote that could be trimmed if space ran short. The lake house hadn't come out of nowhere. It was the first time I had turned that pattern back on him. I thought about the birthdays that blurred together. The first time he forgot was when we were still in school. My sister had a huge party, rented space, music, a cake big enough to feed half the neighborhood. Mine was a last-minute dinner rushed between his work calls, the kind where the check hits the table before you finish your drink, and everyone pretends that counts as effort. He told me he was busy providing for us. I told myself it was fine. It did not stop there. When my sister graduated, he planned a full weekend of events, announcements, photos, speeches about pride and legacy. When I graduated, he shook my hand in a hallway and left early to pick up a suit from the tailor. He mentioned traffic. He mentioned meetings. He did not mention my name when he talked about our family's successes in front of other people. What stung the most was not the lack of gifts or parties. It was the way he measured worth. My sister's choices were treated as investments. Mine were treated as hobbies until they proved useful. When she needed help with tuition, it was a family priority. When I picked up extra shifts and saved for my own goals, it was nice, but not important enough to rearrange anything for. The older we got, the more public it became. He would post about her milestones, write long paragraphs about how proud he was, tell the whole world how she carried the family name forward. When something good happened to me, it might get one short line, if that. In private, he would use my work as an example of stability when it suited his story. But the spotlight never stayed on me for long. It always swung back to her. I had accepted it for years because confronting it felt like breaking something I wasn't sure I could live without. Every time I thought about calling it what it was, I heard the same phrases in my head. That I was overreacting, that all families were a little uneven, that I should be grateful things weren't worse. So I swallowed it and told myself I was being mature. The bonus that helped buy the lake house did not fall from the sky. It came from late nights, hard deadlines, and results no one could spin away from me. I had done the work, tracked every payment, watched the numbers grow slowly in an account no one else touched. My father never asked how I was managing my own finances. He assumed that if he needed something, I would be there to provide it. Now, for the first time, that assumption had cost him something he cared about. Not money, not a bill. His story. The one where he was the architect of everyone's life. The one where my sister shone and I stood just far enough behind her to make the picture look balanced. A house bought without him, in a place he had never chosen, was more than a purchase. It was a refusal. As I unpacked dishes and folded towels into new drawers, I understood why his reaction had been so sharp. The lake house did not just represent distance, it represented proof. Proof that I could build something significant without his guidance, and that I was willing to attach my name to it publicly. Proof that his version of the family was not the only one people could see anymore. That was the first real consequence he had ever faced that I had any control over. I was not shouting. I was not begging. I was not demanding anything from him at all. I was simply living in a way that no longer protected his image at the cost of my own sanity. For the first time in my life, my absence from his script had a visible address, and he knew everyone could see it. The next wave came from a different direction. It did not hit through my own screen first. It reached me through people who kept a reasonable distance from the family drama most of the time. A coworker sent a brief message asking if everything was okay at home. A cousin I had not spoken to in months liked the photo of the house, then followed up with a private note that felt half supportive, half curious. That was how I knew my father had started talking. He did not like to look unreasonable, so he never opened with anger when outsiders were involved. He framed it as concern. According to the version that reached me, he was worried I was making impulsive choices, afraid I might be in over my head, hurt that I had shut him out after all he had done. None of those phrases sounded like him. They sounded like something he crafted carefully for an audience, and for once, I was not part of that audience. For years he had used that tone to keep control. Calm, rational, disappointed. Now he was using it on other people to build a story where he was the patient father, and I was the unstable daughter who needed guidance. The more I heard secondhand, the clearer the pattern became. My house was not just a crack in his image, it was a threat to the role he had written for himself. Money entered the story next. I saw it in a message forwarded by a relative who still knew how to recognize a line being crossed. My father had suggested that since I had enough savings to buy a lake house, I should step up and cover a large part of my sister's upcoming celebration. The number he named was not small. It would have wiped out most of the safety I had built, the very cushion that allowed me to walk away from his version of life. He did not ask me directly. He told other people what he expected me to do, and waited for the pressure to reach me through them. It was a familiar tactic, but this time I was watching it from outside rather than standing in the middle of it. That distance changed everything. Instead of explaining why his request was unfair, I asked myself a different question. What would happen if I simply refused and let the consequences fall where they belonged? The answer was uncomfortable, but honest. He would have to either admit publicly that he had been counting on my money or adjust his plans to fit reality. Either way, something would finally cost him more than it cost me. I started gathering what I had never allowed myself to collect before: proof. Not to post online, not to humiliate anyone for strangers to see, but to remind myself that this was not all in my head. Screenshots of messages where my birthday was treated like an inconvenience. Photos of events where I was present physically but erased in the captions. Notes I had written on bad nights, documenting what was said so I would stop rewriting it later in a softer tone. Looking at it all together was like reading a case file. For the first time, I was not the one on trial. He had spent years building a narrative where I owed him constant understanding, where any resistance from me made him the victim. Standing in my own living room, surrounded by packed boxes and evidence, I made a quiet decision. I was done defending myself inside a story he controlled. If he wanted to keep talking about me, he was going to have to do it without my cooperation. That was the beginning of the real revenge. Not a dramatic scene, not a shouted confrontation, but a deliberate refusal to carry his version of events any further than my own front door. The opportunity to act came sooner than I expected. It started with an email from a relative who usually stayed neutral. She had been invited to my sister's celebration and wanted to know if I was coming, because she had heard conflicting stories. The message was brief and careful, which made it the perfect place to decide how I was going to move from collecting proof to actually using it. I did not send a long explanation. I responded with facts only. I wrote that my father had not called me on my birthday, that he had used my savings in conversations with others before asking me anything directly, and that the house by the lake had been bought with my own money. No insults, no emotional language, no instructions about what she should believe. I gave her the pieces and let her decide what picture they formed. That response became the template. When coworkers, cousins, or old family friends reached out with the same cautious tone, I did the same thing. I stopped covering for him. I stopped filling in the gaps between what he said and what had actually happened. Whenever someone mentioned that he was worried about me, I answered with one clear sentence about what I had done and what he had not. You can only control a story as long as other people depend on you to translate it. The moment I stepped out of that role, cracks began to show. They did not appear as dramatic confrontations. They appeared in quiet shifts. A colleague chose not to attend my sister's party after hearing both sides. A relative mentioned that the way he spoke about my finances did not match the way I handled myself in real life. He could not accuse them all of disloyalty without exposing the pattern. Money pressure circled back again, but this time it hit something solid. The venue for my sister's celebration required a final payment larger than he had planned for because he had counted on my contribution. When he tried to adjust things quietly, people noticed. Deposits had been promised. Vendors had been told to expect full payment. Cutting back suddenly would mean explaining why, and the answer no longer sounded like a man in control. He had options. He could borrow, pretend it had always been meant to be smaller, or swallow the cost himself. None of those choices fit the image he had built. For the first time, he had to choose between his pride and his comfort. I was not there to watch it unfold, but pieces of it still reached me. A last-minute change to the guest list, a downgraded menu, someone mentioning that he looked strained the whole night instead of triumphant. Small details, but together they formed a picture I had never seen before. A night that revolved around my sister but did not feel like a clean victory for him. Meanwhile, my life did not collapse the way he had implied it would if I stepped out of line. The house became a home. I learned which places in town had what I needed and which faces I could expect to see each week. My work remained steady. The numbers in my accounts moved in the direction I had planned, untouched by anyone else's emergency. That contrast was its own form of justice. The more stable I became, the more unsteady his narrative looked. A controlling parent can only call you reckless for so long before people start comparing words with outcomes. Here I was, living quietly, paying my bills, hurting no one. There he was, stretching finances for appearances, using other people's names to prop up his own. I did not expose him with a dramatic reveal. I did something far more dangerous to his version of reality. I let the truth sit in plain sight and refused to move it out of anyone's way. The line he crossed next was different. It did not come through relatives or group chats or whispers. It arrived in my work inbox, folded inside an email from my manager. The subject line was neutral, the kind that usually hides routine information. The content was not. Attached was a message my father had sent to the company's general contact address, asking to speak with someone in authority about my recent decisions. He wrote that he was deeply concerned about my judgment and hinted that I might be unstable, that a sudden property purchase by a daughter who refused family guidance could signal poor reliability. He did not name the lake house, but he did not have to. He framed it as a warning, as if undermining my career would somehow pull me back into his reach. My manager did not respond to him. She forwarded it to me with a brief note asking if everything on my end was all right and whether I wanted to formally document the contact. She did not sound shaken. She sounded offended on my behalf. Reading his words at my desk, I felt something settle instead of break. He was willing to risk my income and reputation just to regain control. Any doubt about whether the distance was necessary disappeared in that moment. This was not about care. It was about ownership. We set up a meeting with HR that afternoon. I brought the emails, screenshots of messages he had sent through other channels, and a short timeline of the past few weeks. I did not dramatize anything. I described unwanted interference from a relative who did not accept my independence. They listened, took notes, and assured me that any further contact from him would be filtered and recorded. That conversation created a paper trail my father could not rewrite. The consequences for him began quietly. A senior partner who had seen the email recognized his name from past social events and commented that it was not a good look to undermine your own adult child in writing. Another contact who had heard his version of the story asked me, in a professional setting, whether I needed any resources for dealing with controlling relatives. The image he had spent years polishing developed a visible crack where he had least expected it. Among people whose respect he valued, I did not push it further. I did not share screenshots outside the channels that needed them. I did not warn him his email had backfired. Letting him believe his move was invisible was part of the justice. He had thrown a stone at a structure he thought I needed more than he did. The structure held. His hand was the one people noticed. At home, my decisions became even simpler. I removed him from emergency contact forms. I updated records that still listed the family house as a fallback address. I closed every remaining door he might use to reach into my life without my consent. None of it was loud. All of it was final. The last step was mine, and I took it deliberately. I wrote one message to the extended family mailing list, the same one that had carried announcements about my sister's parties for years. I stated that I had experienced a long pattern of being dismissed and used, that recent actions had crossed a line into direct harm, and that I was choosing to end contact with my father and anyone who tried to speak on his behalf. I did not ask for understanding. I did not invite debate. I closed with a single sentence: I wish you well from a distance, and I will not be part of this dynamic any longer. Then I hit send, blocked the numbers I needed to block, and walked outside. The lake was calm that evening. For the first time, the quiet around me did not feel like something imposed. It felt like something I had claimed. A few months after I sent that final email, my life no longer resembled anything my father had planned. The distance held. No one tried to sneak me into side conversations or negotiate on his behalf. The relatives who answered kept their messages brief. Some admitted they had noticed this pattern for years. Some quietly stepped back. The silence that followed was not a test to see how long it would take me to bend. It was a recognition that I would not. Updates about my father reached me in small pieces. A business contact mentioned to one of my colleagues that he had heard about the email my father sent to my company, and that it was not a good look. An old neighbor told a cousin that his jokes about difficult children were landing badly. No one confronted him. They simply stopped taking his word as the final authority on anything that involved his daughters. He could not undo that with a speech or a generous check. Inside the family, there was movement too. My sister, who had always stood in the brightest part of his spotlight, started to feel how narrow it really was. When people heard about new plans for her, they did not nod along automatically. They asked where I was living now, how I was doing, whether things were really as simple as he made them sound. For the first time, his story had visible gaps, and he did not have me nearby to fill them. I did not rush in to explain. When someone came to me directly, I answered the same way every time. I described what I had done, what he had done, and where my boundary now stood. No insults, no exaggeration, just facts. Without realizing it, I had stopped being his shield and become a mirror he could not control. Meanwhile, my own life became almost boring from the outside, which felt like luxury. I worked, paid bills, fixed small things around the house, learned who to call when something broke that I could not handle alone. I made friends who knew me as the woman by the lake who showed up on time and kept her word. They did not care who my father was. They cared whether I did what I said I would do. That stability was the opposite of the chaos he predicted when he tried to interfere with my job. Every steady month in that house was a quiet answer to his claims about me being unreliable. He had tried to weaken my foundation. All he really did was expose his own. There were no dramatic confrontations after that, no surprise visits, no last attempts to win me over. Control does not usually chase what it can no longer command. It retreats and rewrites the script for the audience that remains. I am sure, somewhere in his version of this story, I am still the ungrateful daughter who chose distance over loyalty. That is his right. He can keep that version as long as he wants. I do not have to live inside it. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is not that cutting ties is easy or that everyone should do what I did. It is that there comes a point where protecting someone else's comfort costs you more than you can afford. My father's punishment did not come from something dramatic I did to him. It came from losing the ability to use me as a prop in a life he cared more about polishing than sharing. You cannot always make people see what they have done. You can, however, stop helping them hide it. If you hear pieces of your own life in mine, remember this. You are allowed to step out of roles that shrink you, even if that means becoming the villain in someone else's retelling. Sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is simply living well in a story you write for yourself. Thank you for listening. If this made you rethink your own family patterns or boundaries, tell me which moment hit you hardest and where you are listening from. Your comment might be the nudge that helps someone else finally choose themselves.